My sister Linda and I were born either side of the creation of the National Health Service in 1948. I like to think our relative birth weights had something to do with Labour's greatest achievement. In 1947, Linda weighed just 5 pounds 4 ounces and was so tiny that she slept on a pillow in a drawer, which was convenient given that there was no room for a cot. By contrast, I put the boom into baby boomer, weighing in at 10 pounds on the 17th of May 1950. It was a complicated birth and it took its toll on Lily. She and I nearly died, she from the strain on what it would later emerge was already a weak heart, and me because the umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. Lily was advised to have no more children and agreed to be sterilised. When I heard this mentioned as a child, I could only equate it with sterilised milk, bottles of which were ubiquitous on Britain's doorsteps. I had no conception of the pain and anguish that sterilisation must have caused an attractive woman still in her 20s. I was to be named Robin until Alan Ladd, the Hollywood film star, made a brief but lasting intervention in my life. I've always rather liked the idea of being Robin Johnson, but the woman in the next bed to Lily's at Paddington General Hospital was a big fan of the diminutive Mr. Ladd, as for some inexplicable reason were most young women at the time, and Rocking Robin was quickly renamed Alan, with the awful addition of my father's middle name, Arthur. Nobody calls their children Alan or Arthur anymore. Come to think of it, there are very few Lindas under 50 either. I hated Arthur so much that I never used it. At secondary school, I pretended that the second A of my initials stood for Alvis. We lived, courtesy of the Row Housing Trust, at 107 Southam Street, North Kensington, London, West 10, a street whose buildings had been condemned in the 1930s. At least one family occupied each of the 4 floors and the dank basement. Before my arrival, Lily, Steve and Linda had lived in one room, but when I was born, the trust gave us 2 rooms on a higher floor, one for sleeping in and one for eating in. Everyone used the same front door and the single decrepit toilet in the small concrete yard that backed onto the railway line in and out of Paddington Station. There was no electricity in the house, or outside for that matter. The street was lit by gas lamps, which a man on a pushbike came to light every evening. Lily told us he was the Sandman, come to send us to sleep. Notting Hill has become the generic term for a whole chunk of West London, but we didn't call our bit Notting Hill then. It was North Kensington, or to be more accurate, Kensal Town, known to us simply as the Town. Notting Hill was at the other end of Ladbroke Grove. Southam Street was famously immortalised by the renowned photojournalist Roger Main in a series of photographs taken between 1956 and 1961. He recorded both the squalor and the vibrancy of life there, the spirit of survivors inhabiting the uninhabitable. The houses first condemned 2 decades earlier were eventually declared unfit for human habitation while we were in residence, and by the 1960s they had all been demolished. In the meantime, we lived in 2 houses in the street, moving in 1956 from number 107 to number 149, where we had 3 rooms and a cooker on the landing. The street straddled both sides of the Goulburn Road. Those of us in the west end of the street referred to the eastern part as the rough end. Doubtless they said the same about our side. There were no cars but plenty of kids. Indeed, as I recall, Southam Street was designated a play street. A blue sign outside the Earl of Warwick pub at the junction with Goulburn Road informed drivers that they could enter for access only. Since nobody in Southam Street had a car, that meant a vehicle-free street, teeming with children. Given the overcrowding and the lack of sanitation, it's hardly surprising that the street was where people gathered, kids and grown-ups alike, irrespective of the weather. I'm convinced that the blurred image of a child in the background of one of Main's photographs is Linda. It's quite likely she was always out playing in the road. Linda's character was completely different from mine. She had learned to walk and talk at the earliest age possible, whereas I